Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Amit Harari, and coming up in today's newscast, the United States now stepping up efforts at normalizing relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, Britain has a new king and queen. All the stories from King Charles' festive coronation. And later, ILTV speaking to Eurovision journalists in Liverpool, telling us everything we should be expecting in the coming week. Two Palestinian terrorists responsible for a shooting attack last week were killed yesterday in Tulkarem during a raid by security forces. The gunmen were killed in a shootout during the raid on the Nul Shams refugee camp carried out by police and undercover border police officers. ILTV's Steve Leibovich has the story.
The operation in Tulkarem was aimed at suspects in the shooting near the community of Avnei Chefetz on Tuesday, in which one person was lightly wounded. The gunmen were shot and killed as they were attempting to flee the scene on a rooftop. The terrorists were identified as Hamza Haryush and Samar al-Shafi, both 22. They were reportedly affiliated with the Islamic Jihad terrorists in the so-called Tulkarem Battalion. Police seized 2 assault rifles, magazines, and a military vest from the dead terrorists' bodies. 2 additional wanted men were arrested during the operation and are being held for questioning. No Israeli soldiers were hurt during the raid. In Tuesday's shooting attack, gunmen exited a vehicle at the Shufa junction and fired it toward 3 cars, leaving Avnei Chefetz, a 39-year-old Israeli man traveling in one of the vehicles, was lightly injured by glass. The Israeli military has been conducting near-nightly raids in Judea and Samaria amid a series of deadly Palestinian terror attacks that have killed 19 people since the beginning of the year and left several seriously hurt. At least 101 Palestinians have been killed since the beginning of the year, most of them while carrying out attacks or during clashes with security forces.
The U.S. is stepping up efforts at normalizing relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Ahead of a trip to Riyadh, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said he sees a benefit to U.S. national security in brokering normal relations, and the expansion of the Abraham Accords will be a focus of Washington over the coming period. More from ILTV's William Sharon.
U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says the Biden administration is committed to supporting Israel's ultimate, final, complete integration into the Middle East region. The statement framing Saudi-Israeli relations as the U.S. security interest appears to be the policy shift for the Biden administration.
We have the interest and bandwidth to promote normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And in fact, it's this administration that has produced the first tangible step of these two countries coming close together with the opening of the airspace over Saudi Arabia for civilian flights from Israel. But ultimately, getting to full normalization is a declared national security interest of the United States. We have been clear about that.
Sullivan revealed he would be traveling to Riyadh over the weekend, hoping to further the goal. While Saudi officials have privately expressed interest in such an agreement in recent years, the prospects of Israeli-Saudi normalization remain distant. Riyadh has presented extensive demands regarding major improvements to their bilateral relationships as a pre-request for a deal. Sullivan was also emphatic about the U.S. determination to prevent Iranian nuclearization.
We remain determined to ensure that challenge does not cross the line to Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon. And yes, we will take the necessary action to ensure that Iran does not acquire a nuclear weapon. At the end of the day, that's the fundamental test. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. They do not today, and they cannot have one.
Sullivan emphasized the close cooperation between Israel and Washington on every diplomatic move.
Yesterday, I had a secure video conference with my counterpart, the National Security Advisor, and the Prime Minister dropped in on the video conference to have a discussion.
Sullivan rejected the notion that Saudi Arabia's decision to march to normalization relations with Iran was a step away from Riyadh striking a deal with Israel. Sullivan said the U.S. was in close touch with Riyadh all the way through its talks with Tehran.
So we know the news is fast-paced, and we want to let you know that ILTV's new app is now available. So if you want to stay connected to the latest news from Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, download our new app now on all your devices. It's available in the App Store for both Android and iPhone. And joining us right now with more on the joint efforts is former Israeli diplomat to the United States, Yoram Ettinger, Ambassador Ettinger. The U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is sounding like the Biden administration wants to make a real push for Israeli-Saudi normalization and its importance for U.S. national security. Is the effort likely to succeed?
Well, it seems to me that National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has quite a hurdle ahead of him, and this is the hurdle of restoring the U.S. posture of deterrence, which has been eroded severely by the U.S. own policy in the Middle East. Jake Sullivan will face in Saudi Arabia very severe opposition to U.S. national security policy. In fact, this is a policy which has pushed the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates and Egypt closer than ever to China and Russia because of their disillusionment with American preference to a diplomatic option when it comes to Iran's Ayatollah, the diplomatic option which has produced more severe lethal threats to every single pro-American Arab regime in the Middle East. The Saudis are also very upset with the American evacuation or flight, in fact, from Afghanistan. And certainly the Saudis have been disillusioned with the Americans courting the Muslim Brotherhood terrorists and the Houthi terrorists in Yemen. Certainly, American policies of concern to Israel, but the problems faced both by Israel and the Saudis today have to do with America's own policy rather than Israeli policy.
Now we hear Sullivan talked tough on the Iran issue, mainly insisting that Tehran would not be allowed to secure nuclear weapons. He also said the diplomatic route was still preferred. What is the U.S. prepared to do?
Well, talk is very nice, but it's completely irrelevant when the walk opposes or contradicts the talk. The fact is that since February 1979, the U.S. has persisted with a diplomatic option on Iran, a diplomatic option which has netted the Ayatollahs of Iran over $150 billion. And those dollars have not been directed by the Ayatollahs towards enhanced standard of living, but rather intensified anti-American terrorism, anti-American drug trafficking, and anti-American proliferation of advanced missile and military technologies, by the way, all the way to Central and South America, for the Americans to resurrect their posture of deterrence, at least when it comes to Saudi Arabia and the Emiratis. They will have to change substantially their attitude on Iran. Enough with a diplomatic option, and they will have to consider a regime change option, a military option, or else they will see every single pro-American Arab Sunni regime deserting the American camp and joining the pro-Russia, pro-China camp, obviously at the expense of dire American interests.